Hi everyone, my name's Andrew Rowland and I'm here today to show you the art of challah baking and to share a few of the tips I've picked up on my learning journey. I picked this up as a hobby at the beginning of lockdown, so I started, and I would say it probably took me about 8 weeks to perfect this. There was a lot of trial and error, using old flour, using old yeast, realising, freshness really does count here, and also getting to a point where at one stage, I even forgot to put the yeast in, and I think I have got a picture of that, which I might share, which was pretty dreadful. So over the course of that 8 weeks, I perfected the recipe, something that me and the family like. So what we get is this light, airy dough, a soft bread with a nice crust, but it's, as we'll see, it's an enriched dough, so it's sweet with honey and rich with egg. So it's a really nice, tasty bread. It also freezes really well. And if you freeze it on the day, you make it, defrost it for a couple of hours, it's just equally as good. So I think what I'll do now is just get straight into it and we'll move on to the actual process of making the challah. So we're going to start making the challah now. You see people complaining and saying sort of about ingredients sticking to the bottom of the bowl. So one good tip I can give you here is to put all the wet ingredients in first. So we're going to start here with some water. There's 300 mils of water going into this bowl now, so I'll put that in. I'm going to hold a bit back, so I've actually put about 350 mils of water into this jug, because what we'll do is we will test the dough, see how sticky it is. A stickier dough is really nice, it'll give you a lighter bread, so if you can cope with a stickier dough, that's the best thing to do here. So now I'm going to put in 3 eggs. These have already been whisked, so I'll put those in now. Now, as I said, the other thing I learned, and the other thing that happened to me, unfortunately, was I did do one without yeast at one point. So I said putting in all the wet ingredients first, but at this point I do actually put in the yeast. So we've got 10 grams of instant yeast here, so that's going to go into the bowl next. So the last 2 wet ingredients are vegetable oil and honey. So we're going to do 3 tablespoons of each. Something else I found, is that the oil is really good at keeping the honey from sticking to the spoon. So I tend to alternate these. So now we've got the wet ingredients in. At this point, we can put in the dry. So we can put in the flour and the salt. Now the key thing here again is to keep the salt separate from the yeast. So I always put in the flour first. And the salt on top. So that's it for the ingredients. Now, what we're going to do is, I do use a mixer. Obviously, at this point, you could do it by hand. So, you could combine the ingredients first. Again, I've put everything in all at the same time. Really doesn't make any difference to me that I've found to do it any differently. So mix that until you get the dough will stick together, and then obviously you can start to mix that and knead that. And this dough needs about 10 to 15 minutes of kneading by hand, which is why I love the mixer. So we'll put this in, put this down, and now we're ready to start mixing. So we've been mixing now for a couple of minutes, and as you can see, it's starting to come together and it's starting to get a nice smooth dough now. It's quite sticky, because that's what I say, a sticky dough give you a nice light bread. We need to check is if we've done enough kneading on the first knead. Obviously, when you're doing it yourself by hand, you'll be feeling the dough and when it goes smooth and stretchy. But I guarantee a great way of doing it is something called the window pane test. So you literally just take a little handful of dough, and what we're going to do here now is put this up to the light, up to a window, and you're basically going to stretch the dough like this. And as you can see at the moment, it's very, very easily pulling apart. Now what will happen, and as you'll see as we progress further, is that will stretch. So when we can basically see through it like a stained glass window, effectively the dough is done. So this obviously isn't yet, so we're going to carry on mixing for another 5 minutes or so. This dough has been kneading in my machine for about 7 or 8 minutes. So we're going to do the window pane test with this lump of dough now. And as you can see, we start to pull it, as I said before, and it actually goes nice and thin and see-through without actually tearing. So look how far we can stretch that dough. So that is now ready. We can now do the next stage of the bread. We've done the window pane test. We know this bread is now ready to go for its first proof. So as you saw, it's quite a sticky dough. So you could see it's stuck, hasn't formed a ball around the dough hook, which something like a bloomer or a normal white bread would do. So it's a bit stuck around the edges, and that's absolutely fine. I've got one of these silicone dough scrapers, which is really great, plastic dough scrapers rather. So we just get in there, we're pulling it off of the sides. And then we're going to tip it out and get it out onto the work surface, just working it round with the scraper to get it all out of your bowl onto the work surface. There we go. Okay, pick up any last bits of dough. It's all too good to leave behind and to waste. Okay, so there we go. So we've now got our dough, which as you can see is nice and sticky, even on this sort of work surface. We've got a silicone mat here. So literally you're just going to work it around like this until we can basically just pull it off like that. Okay, and then you can do this on the work surface, but I like to do this by hand just in the air, because what you're basically doing here is stretching out the bread, and you're going to form a nice tight ball around here. Here we're just literally just letting it drop, and we're just folding it back on itself to get a nice taut ball like that. Okay, now we get that as tight as we can. That's all the gluten that we've needed, makes that stretch. There we go, so we've got a nice taut ball there. Okay, so that's now going to go into the bowl for proving for a while, and I'll talk about that in a second. So just a tiny little bit of oil in the bowl like that, and then we'll just put the bread in, put the challah dough in, give it a turn around. There we go. Make sure it's all nice and free to move around and to expand, and then we'll cover that with a nice bit of cling wrap. And we're now going to leave that to prove until it's doubled in size. Now that again is going to vary depending on your kitchen and your conditions, through lots of trial and error. We've worked out for us that basically the first proof is an hour. So we're going to now leave this in the bowl for an hour, and we'll come back to it. And then I'll show you another little tip for working out whether the dough is proved or not. So this has been raising for about an hour now, just over an hour. And as you can see, it's actually more than doubled in size. So this is fine to now take out. So we're basically going to take this out and put it onto our surface. And now we're going to basically just knock out all that air. Okay, we can see, just knock out all the air. Okay, now basically what we're doing now is we're going to actually form the loaves, and we're going to leave them for a second proof. So to do that, each challah that I make, I actually make a four braid challah. So obviously with this dough, I want to basically turn it into 8 balls that we can then flatten out and braid. You can do that however you want. We can just cut up and divide into 8 rough size. I'm afraid I'm a little bit more precise than that, and I like to weigh it. So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this dough, I'm going to weigh it, divide it into 8 balls, and then we'll then take it from there. So we'll just cut away now, and let me do that, and come back, and then I'll show you how to form a couple of balls of dough ready for forming into the braids. So here I'm just forming the dough into a nice tight ball. The reason I'm doing this is obviously just to give myself a nice starting point for when I roll it out. So what we've got here, obviously 8 strands, so we've got 8 balls of dough. You can do this a number of ways. Again, I do it in my hand like this, just literally just pushing up from underneath, stretching the outside to get a nice smooth ball like that. But you could also just literally pull it out onto a surface, and then start to just sort of like fold it in like that, roll it that way, whatever you find easiest for forming the dough balls to start with. Okay, There we go, so it's a nice, there's our 8 dough balls. Key thing as well, keep them covered. When they're done, we don't want them to dry out or form a skin. So we'll get them covered there. And then we'll start to make the strands. So with these, got a nice smooth side, put that down, start in the middle there, and we're gonna use a rolling pin, and we're basically just gonna roll these out now into a rectangle, about 20 centimeters long. So when we get it out to about 20 centimeters like this, we're gonna turn it round, and we're just gonna stretch it into a rectangle like this. Okay, stretch it out, make it as rectangular as we can. And then we're basically gonna roll this into a braid between 20 and 30 centimeters long. And we'll basically as well put some pressure on the ends. So we make it's sort of slightly fatter in the middle. And what we're also looking for is the seam where it joined up. And you can see here, as I'm rolling it, it's starting to close up. If the dough was a bit drier, then you might find that seam stays open. If the seam stays open, then there's a risk that as it expands in the oven, it's going to split on that seam. So the thing to do is to pinch it along the seam like that. So just basically pinch it shut and keep rolling. Okay, so we're going to do this 4 times for the first 4 braids. Another tip for you here, obviously I'm working on like a silicone mat here, which helps against the dough sticking onto the surface. If you're going to do it just on your worktop, I wouldn't use flour. If you were to use flour, then what happens is it changes the consistency slightly of the dough and it can end up being a drier dough. So I'd always use a little bit of oil. So just a little bit of oil on the surface will stop it sticking and won't change the consistency of the dough. So that's just another little bit of advice. Or one of these silicone mats is really good. We've got our 4 strands now and they're pretty even. So what we're going to do now is do the braiding. So to do that, we just bring the 4 strands together at one end and just place them one on top of the other and press them down to keep those together at that end, okay? A 4 braid is pretty simple. Obviously, you can do anything from a 3, 6, 7, 8, whatever. What I've sort of settled on the 4 because I think it gives a nice shaped loaf and it expands nicely to give us a good size of slice. Okay, so here's a close-up of the plaiting. We've got them numbered from here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 2 over 3, 4 over 2, and then 1 over 3, like that. What we're going to do is at the top, we're just going to fold that under, make sure that's nice and tight there. And as we're doing the plait, again, we're going to try and keep these nice and tight and the shape as even as we can as we go down. So let's just repeat that. So it's 2 over 3, 4 over 2, and then 1 over 3, like that. And we'll do that again. 2 over 3, 4 over 2, and then 1 over 3 there. And then with these ends that we've got here, what I tend to do is, if we've got enough to do one final little twist, we can do that. So I think I'm probably just get a little final twist here, but then I'll pull these ends underneath and squeeze them together underneath to get that nice even plait down the bread. Onto the tray. This is just a silicone mat. You can equally use baking paper, parchment paper, whatever you like. So these are now ready for the second proof. So I use these great massive plastic bags that I got off of Amazon, good on Amazon. Fill them with air, put that inside, and then basically give it a nice shake like that. Get lots of as much air in as you can, and then fold the end over and underneath. And then by trapping the air Obviously, we're going to naturally keep the plastic away from the rising dough. So we now leave those again for the second proof. From my kitchen, we do this about 45 minutes. Okay, so we've now 30 minutes into the rise. So this second rise is about 45 minutes. So I'm going to put my oven on. So a couple of things about this, and the main thing, is that is to do with the actual crust and how we form this. So you can see I've got just a deep baking dish here. So I'm going to put this in the bottom of the oven. So let's do that first. I'm going to put the oven on as a fan. It's a fan 180. So that's on. So, and then I'm going to set myself a time of 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and that'll be the time to put the bread in. Now, you're probably asking yourself why I've put a tray in the bottom. So what I'm going to be doing is just at the time when I put the bread in, I'm also going to put some hot water in the tray, and that's going to basically form a load of steam in the oven. Now, the reason for the steam is as the bread expands in the oven and the yeast is doing its job and it's expanding, the steam will stop the crust forming. So what can happen is if the crust forms too quickly, what happens is the crust will crack and you'll end up with lots of ugly lines and expansion. But by putting that in with some water, it will put steam in the oven and that will delay the crust forming, which means we'll get a nice rise in the oven before the crust starts to form. Okay, so this has had a second rise of about 45 minutes. Now, as you can see, it's expanded quite a bit. It's also, because of my not very professional braiding, it's sort of gone a little bit out of over to one side. So it's okay at this point to, obviously it's full of air, as you can see, but it's okay to give it a bit of a, very gentle play around with, just to get the shaping just right, like that. And then this one as well, just give it a little tuck under. And so just be careful not to knock out any air. There we go, we spent time putting it in, so let's not knock it out. Okay, so now what we're going to do is do the glazing, and then we'll be ready to put it in the oven. So in here, I've just got one whole egg that I've just whisked up. So let's just get on with it. Obviously, I'm sure everyone knows how to brush egg wash. So get this over all the exposed areas, underneath, on top. So now we're ready just to put on whichever topping we want. So let's start with everything but the bagel. This one comes in a handy shaker, so we'll just shake over some topping. There we go, so that's okay with that one. And now we'll do the second loaf. Right, there we go. Actually, before I put the topping on this one, I should have explained about the second proof. I did mention before. To know when your bread has finished the second proof, if you just give it a prod on top or somewhere to the side, what you're looking for is for that indentation to come back, but to come back very slowly, which is what this is doing, and it will still leave a mark. And the point there is that if it was to come back straight away, then basically the yeast hasn't finished its process, but you can see here, this is coming back, still see the little indentation. So the yeast has basically done its work, and we're ready, the second proof is done. So here we go, this poppy seeds, so literally just a little teaspoon of poppy seeds. Here's another little tip, if you just tap that as you're going over, hopefully you can control the amount of poppy seeds that go onto it a little bit easier than just shaking it. There we go. Okay, so there are our two loaves ready to go in the oven. So let's go and put them in. Right, so we're ready to go in the oven. So as I say, we know we've got the tin in the bottom that we're going to put the water in. So we'll get the bread in first, then we will basically whip out the bottom tray, put the water in as fast as we can, and shut the oven door to maximise the amount of steam that's in the oven. Key thing here is the water is just boiled as well, so it's not going to take time to heat up. It should just go on and give us instant steam. So here we go. And that's it. We now leave that in for 25 minutes. Okay, so we've had 25 minutes, so let's get them out, and I'll show you how to test to see if your bread's cooked. They're looking nice and golden. Right, there we go. So, best way to check whether your bread is cooked is to tap it and listen for a hollow sound. So, we just tip it onto its side. We can see it's nice crust there, nice and brown on the bottom. If you can hear that, that sounds hollow all the way along, that's cooked. So we're literally just going to transfer it to a cooling rack. It's a bit hot. There we go. So just an ordinary cooling rack there. I always put a bit of kitchen paper underneath just to absorb any steam that might come off the bottom, but there we go. And as you can see, it's not really expanded too much, it's stayed within the plait. So we've got a nice defined plait, and we've got two very nice looking loaves. So we've done the difficult bit now. We've waited for about an hour to let the bread cool. It's really difficult because I know the temptation is to obviously take the bread straight out and just tear a bit off. And what I'd say to you is that's fine if you're going to eat the whole lot, or if you've got a roll or something like that. But where you've got a loaf that might want to last a bit longer, you've got to try and let it cool for a bit. And the reason for that, obviously at the moment everything's contained in the crust, but if you open the bread, then basically all the steam will escape, and what you can end up doing is with a very dry bread, because all the nice moisture won't have been reabsorbed. So leave it for as long as you can. So let's just take a look inside. So there we go. So there's this nice slice of a beautiful challah. You can see we've got a nice crumb there. It's really soft. We'll give it a nice squidge. That's really, really soft. And then give it a nice tear, and look, you can see how that just pulls apart nice. Delicious. There we go. So that's it. That's the tutorial on how to bake challah at home. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it easy and informative. I hope you can give it a go. So just if you like and comment on this post, let me know how you get on. Post any pictures of your challahs too, that would be great. So until next time, thanks very much.